Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse. I want to let you know that you're not stupid. You're not going crazy. You're not confused. You're sensing something is wrong or off. I'm talking to those of you who, in a difficult relationship, maybe an emotionally abusive relationship, where you're trying to figure out what you're not getting or what you're getting wrong, or maybe you're taking the blame for somebody else's behavior because they say that you are causing the problems, but you can't figure it out, but they're smart, so maybe you just should believe them, when the reality is something else is going on. I'm telling you this because I get a lot of messages from people, including those in the mental health field, that not only are learning about emotional abuse and all that it entails, but are sometimes in or have been in emotionally abusive relationships, and they didn't realize it until it was too late. Some of them realized it, but they wanted to work things out or work things through because maybe they could fix it, or maybe they could help the other person or just understand what was going on and what they were doing. But in most cases of emotionally abusive relationships, trying to tell the other person, hey, you're doing these things to me, will you please stop? Or you're doing these things to me, let's talk about it. In most cases, that doesn't stop the behaviors. You can say all you want to a person doing these behaviors, but they are typically lifelong, having learned them a long time ago. When we're children, we learn to deal with challenges in our own way, or we learn from others. If we learn to deal with challenges in our own way, we may get it wrong. We may get it right in the moment, like it's okay to hide and be silent if we have an abusive parent, so we hide to protect ourselves. But maybe in a relationship when we grow older, that's not the right behavior, because as adults we are supposed to communicate differently. We're supposed to respond and react and behave differently around other adults, especially ones we're in relationships with. So as children, we develop these survival skills to get through the challenges because we don't know any better. And if we learned from healthy adults how to get through the challenges, maybe we won't bring emotionally abusive behavior into our adult relationships. But when that doesn't happen, when we either learn on our own how to deal with challenges, and those don't translate well as adults, the way we deal with them then doesn't always translate to how we should deal with things today. So children can learn on their own, or they can learn from other adults around them, or other children around them, or whoever their influences are. And they take those behaviors into adult relationships, and depending on what the behavior is, it either turns into some dysfunction or some emotionally abusive behavior. Using the example of a child trying to protect themselves from an abusive adult, so they hide, they stay quiet, so they don't cause the adult to react, because the reaction might lead to abuse. So the child learns to stay quiet. The child learns to become a people pleaser, and that child takes these survival skills at the time, brings them into their adult life, and doesn't change them because they worked, at least as a child. But they don't change these old survival mechanisms as adults because they've not found any evidence to the contrary of what might work better, and it became ingrained. Their brain learned how to do these behaviors over and over again until they became unconscious. This isn't an excuse for emotionally abusive behavior, or any abusive behavior for that matter, but it is one of the causes that I've seen. And I speak from experience. I was brought up in an abusive alcoholic home, and I learned survival skills and coping mechanisms back then that I brought into my adult relationships and really screwed them up. I really messed them up. My history is not clean. And it took several breakups and finally a divorce for me to realize, wait, I am the problem here. I'm the common denominator of the history of my failures in relationships because they all left me. So I finally took responsibility at the end of my marriage to reflect on myself, to choose to stay single until I learned what I was doing that was harmful. And because of that, I changed. I stopped doing the behaviors. I realized that I was holding on to old, unhealthy coping mechanisms that no longer applied to the real adult world that I'm in today. And so this is, I don't know, a good 18, 17 years now since I had this realization, since I started on my own healing journey. And I learned a lot about myself. And I thought I knew a lot back then. I thought I knew what behaviors were toxic and what weren't. And I thought I knew a lot. And then she wanted a divorce. And that really opened my eyes. I realized that I didn't know. I think I actually accepted that I didn't know anything. I told myself, I don't know anything. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew how to love people. I thought I was a great partner in a relationship. But now I realize I don't know anything. How could I know anything if this keeps happening to me? And that was the day I started changing. I finally realized that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And in fact, everything I believed prevented me from getting better. Everything I believed about myself, everything I thought to be true kept me from stopping the behaviors and healing. And that's what I needed to do. I needed to heal who I was, because who I was for most of my life was not healthy. It was toxic and emotionally abusive. And in order to get to a better place inside myself, I had to admit that I knew nothing. I had to start with a blank slate. I had to start from scratch. So I had to take a hit to the ego and say, Paul, you know nothing. You believe you know these things, but you don't. You believe you know how to make someone happy, but you don't. And that's what I did. I said, I don't know how to do this. So what do I need to do? I need to take one step at a time, look at my behaviors, look at my reactions, and everything, and this is where it really started, every trigger that I had, I needed to look at. So if I was triggered when my wife ate sweets, my ex-wife, then I needed to look at that. Because every time I was triggered, I blamed someone else. I blamed them for my trigger. And I finally decided that I wasn't going to blame other people anymore. I want to take responsibility for the emotional triggers inside of me. And that's when it changed. This is something I teach in my Healed Being program. I tell those who have been emotionally abusive that when you're triggered, it's your problem. If they trigger you, meaning their partner, whoever is triggering them, if they are causing that trigger inside of you in some way, shape, or form, that's your problem, not theirs. That's what changed my focus. I used to focus on them. They need to change. They need to do something different so that I don't get triggered. And that's what changed my life. From that point on, I started looking at all my other triggers and processing them and healing them and figuring out why I had them, looking in my history, looking at my past. Now, I share all this, one, for transparency. I want you to know who I am and where I come from. And two, because all the stuff I knew about communication and behavior and relationships, everything I studied, everything I was certified for to help others with, even though I knew all that stuff, I still didn't know enough. I didn't know enough about these abusive behaviors in order to stop. So I had learned all this stuff. I had read so much. I had gone to classes. I had done everything. And I still didn't know enough to stop the behaviors. And one of the main reasons that I didn't know enough is because people weren't talking about it back then. They weren't talking about how emotional abuse is a drip feeding of bad, toxic behaviors, sometimes throughout the day, and definitely throughout the days and weeks and months and years, that slowly disintegrates somebody from the inside out. it affects the other person so badly that they get worn down and eventually, something I'll be talking about today, burnt out. And when they get burnt out, they're at total defeat. The wind in their sails is gone. And they are just trudging through life, barely surviving. And back then, in my other relationships, I didn't know I was doing that to them. I just thought they had things to work on because obviously I'm getting triggered by what they're doing, so they must be the problem. That was my belief system. So they must have stuff to work on, and I will help them work on it. I thought I was smart enough to help them work through their stuff that triggered me. So I was focused on them changing and not me accepting. And that's the bottom line of all of this, is that I chose not to accept who they are and what they did and any decisions that they made for themselves. And when I had a disagreement with that decision, I became triggered, meaning I might have gotten upset. I might have gotten angry. I might have gotten critical or judgmental. And I would say or do something to make them feel bad. And making them feel bad in my belief system was trying to make them a better person. I was trying to mold them into who I wanted them to be instead of accepting them as they were. And that was my fault. I take full responsibility for it. I feel like crap that I did that to good people. And so I come on the air all the time. This is sort of my way to help other people not get into these same situations, not end up with somebody who is the way I used to be. If you can avoid somebody the way I used to be or worse, because there are a lot of people who are a lot worse and there are a lot of people who weren't as bad, but they are still emotionally abusive in some way. And so you have to deal with it. So one of the points I wanted to make is that even professionals that have been studying psychology, who are PhDs, who have helped people in relationships, they can still get into a relationship like this because of the slow drip feeding effect that emotionally abusive behavior does to a relationship. It affects you slowly. It's the analogy of the frog in the boiling water, though that analogy has been debunked. I think the frog just jumps out, but I don't know if they did that for real, but I think they said that that wouldn't happen, like the frog wouldn't slowly boil to death. But it's a good analogy because that's what it feels like. You get to the point where it feels like you're emotionally boiling to death, and there's a point where you feel total defeat and you give in and you are, like I said earlier, burnt out. So if people in the field of psychology haven't been able to catch this and stop it early and tell their clients about the early warning signs, if they haven't been doing that, at least some of them know, some of them don't. If they haven't been doing that, then they may not catch it in their own life. I've had social workers and therapists reach out to me and share that they've been in these relationships. Those who have a practice have been in these relationships. And some of them have felt really bad that they're giving relationship advice when their own relationship is suffering. And I don't want you to feel bad. If you're in the professional field and you are giving others relationship advice, it's probably very sound. It's probably very good. But giving advice and applying it to your own life, they're two different things, for sure. When you're in the fishbowl, it's a lot different than when you're out of the fishbowl. It's a lot easier to help others and see objectively than sometimes help yourself and look at your own situation without being emotionally involved. Because once you're emotionally involved, that's when things take a turn, because you might have love for the person. You might have fear of the person. You might have to work through logistics because there are kids or bills or whatever. And you might have to deal with other things that you wouldn't have to deal with if you were a professional working with a client. And so this is all preamble for what I'm talking about today, which is somebody wrote to me who is a therapist who was in an emotionally abusive relationship for far too long. And she wrote to me and said, I've been listening a lot. I came out of an emotionally abusive relationship. Being a therapist myself, I realized what was going on, but unfortunately too late. I was having a burnout. My partner showed me no care at all, and I suffered all this time, And then he finally just left, and now lawyers are involved and we have to sell a house and all this other stuff. And so it was a very difficult situation for her, and I asked her to expand on it, and she sent me a letter that expanded on a lot of things. And I'm going to read you a little portions of it while keeping her confidentiality, of course. But she asked me if I could explain the correlation between burnout and emotionally abusive relationships. So I'm going to read these segments of her email. And before we talk about what led to the burnout, just think about every segment that I read as a stepping stone to burnout. And then we'll talk about burnout at the end. But what I'll do is read these segments and create some sort of stopping point. And I don't mean that I don't only mean that I'm going to stop, but I also mean that in a relationship where you see these things happening, that's also a stopping point for you. So I'll read something, I'll comment on that, and then we'll talk about why that should be a stopping point in the relationship. And I don't mean you end the relationship. I mean you address it. Or you could end the relationship for sure. You have that option. Hopefully you have that option. But if you're in a relationship where you can address things and you can talk about things, then maybe that will be progress. If you can't and you try and it doesn't work, then you might have another choice to make. So let's just talk about this real quick. Again, she wrote back and explained everything that was going on in her life, and it was very helpful. The first thing I want to read is, she said, he spoke openly about not experiencing emotions like sadness or anger, describing them as weaknesses, as something, quote, unfunctional for a man. As a therapist, I tried to explain emotions are not flaws, but signals. They are guides that help us understand ourselves. Here's the stopping point. Let's stop here and talk about it, and let's talk about how this is a stopping point in a relationship to take a step back and think about how we're going to address this, because something like this does need to be addressed, and it does need to be considered. So here's a therapist saying, hey, look, emotions are good. We all have them, and we should all deal with them and heal through them, and they're perfectly normal. So this stopping point is asking yourself if you want to be with somebody who sees emotions as a weakness. This sounds like a core belief. And I'm not putting this other person who wrote on the spot here. I'm saying that if you're dealing with this now, if you are starting a new relationship and someone sees any negative emotion, or at least these two of sadness and anger, as weaknesses or something unfunctional, like they're not productive or whatever, that's a flag that you need to be aware of and consider before you just move into the next phase of the relationship. And again, I'm not putting this other person on the spot. This is one of those things where maybe we don't stop and make these considerations because everything else is going so well. Maybe everything else looks great and this is just a minor thing and we can get past it because they're treating me well and they seem to love me and everything else feels good. So holistically, everything else is fitting into place. So when somebody says something small like this, seemingly small, like, sadness and anger are weaknesses, it may not be scrutinized, but it should be, because that's a major thing in someone's life. So what I'm doing is calling this a stopping point in a relationship where you step back and you ask yourself, am I okay signing up to a relationship with someone who believes it's unfunctional for them to be sad or show anger? Am I okay with someone who sees anger and sadness as a weakness? And in her case, if he doesn't experience sadness or anger, again, that's an orange flag because it tells you there's an emotional disconnect in there that has likely been in there for his entire life, or at least for a very long time. So anyone else listening, because she's already past this phase in the relationship, but anybody else is listening, if you get to a point where somebody talks like that, where these emotions aren't necessarily productive or important, or they're seen as weaknesses, that's an orange flag that needs to be considered. Because one of the things that is important to understand is that when somebody tells you who they are and what their belief system is, it usually doesn't change. There they are. They're telling you right up front, this is who I am. So if you're okay with somebody never showing sadness or anger, which is probably a wonderful thing for a lot of people listening, but those are also normal emotions that if they're not shown, then what else is shown? If somebody doesn't show anger, if somebody doesn't show sadness, then what else happens in place of that? That's an emotional displacement almost. Like I'm going to replace one emotion for another. Or I'll replace a behavior with this emotion that I don't want to feel. Or because I don't want to feel sad, I'll make you feel sad. Because I don't want to be angry, I'll make you angry or hurt or confused. So when somebody isn't experiencing these emotions or doesn't have the capability of doing it or choosing not to experience the full range of human emotions that we all experience, then take a step back, consider it, reflect on it, and how it's going to affect you in your future. That's just one little thing of this entire message that I received. So let's go on. The next one was, my feelings were dismissed. That's what she said. That's another stopping point. That's when it's time to ask yourself, am I okay signing up for a relationship with someone who dismisses my feelings? That's a good question, and you know the answer. Of course not. But the holistic nature of a relationship where there's so many factors and so many variables, and they treat me great here and they have a problem over there, but it's no big deal because everything else is wonderful, or this is great and that's not so great. And the whole thing just kind of meshes together. And we don't necessarily think about or worry about these tiny little things that, yeah, they're important, but we may not place as much importance on them as we should. That's why we have a stopping point in the relationship. Hey, my feelings were dismissed. We got to stop and talk about this. Or I have to consider it when I think about having a relationship with this person ongoing. Because having my feelings dismissed is not something I want in my life. That's a good question for yourself. Is this something I want in my life? And if something happens and it makes you feel bad or sad or hurt or angry, is this something I want in my life? That's the question. And your reminder is, and this is a good reminder because, like I said earlier, the dysfunctions or the red flags or orange flags that they present early on will always be there. And that's the reminder. This is how it will be from now on. This is who they will be from now on. This is what will happen from now on. They will always dismiss my feelings. And you might say, but that's not always what happens. And if you said that, I would ask you, okay, how often does it happen? Because if you said, well, it happens like 40% of the time, then I would probably ask you, are you okay with 40% of your life, your relationship, being dismissed? Is that okay with you? If you said, well, it only happens once every 6 months, then I would ask you, okay, well, if you're okay with it once every 6 months, then we can, chalk it up to somebody lost their cool and they apologize right away or whatever. And now we're okay again. That's a lot different than 40% of the time. Once every 6 months versus 40% of the time, that's different. Emotionally abusive behavior is drip fed throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year. And that drip feeding is what gives you a percentage like that. 40% of the time they do this, as opposed to every now and then, once every few months, once every year, something like that's a lot different. Oh yeah, they lost their temper that year. Okay, that might have been once and it might have been no big deal, or maybe it was a huge deal, but it never happened again because it was a misunderstanding. I wouldn't necessarily call that emotionally abusive. I would call that a relationship incident. It just happens. And so this is the way it will be from now on, can help you consider what the future will be like. The next thing I'll read is, I couldn't talk about my work because it was, quote, too much for him, even though he was training for a profession in which he could encounter psychological suffering daily. Stopping point. Ask yourself, can I be with someone who can't handle me talking about my day? Will I be okay if my partner can't tolerate hearing about what I'm going through? Am I okay never having them to vent or share struggles with? Because if you don't have somebody to vent to express to share your struggles with, where you can feel safe to be yourself around, where you can feel vulnerable to be yourself, is that something that you are okay with for the rest of the relationship? She said it was too much for him to hear about her day. And he was entering a profession where he was going to have a lot to deal with as well. Now, I'm not dismissing his ability to share with her and vent to her, because it should be equal. You vent, I vent, and we get it out of our system, and then we can connect. That sounds good. I'm not saying it's easy. Sometimes it's hard to hear somebody that we love vent about their day in many ways. It could be hard to listen to that because maybe it's the same stuff all the time and they had to deal with it, and now you're kind of dealing with it because you're hearing about it. But that's what we're here for people that we love. Because if we don't vent to the person that we feel safe around and we love, what happens instead? If we don't vent it out, where does it go? That's what I like to look at, emotional displacement. We displace one emotion with another. So if I want to vent because I'm angry, and the person I'm with says, I don't want to hear you vent, I don't want to deal with it, I can't handle it, then where will that anger go? I'm just venting about my day, venting about somebody else. I would hope I have a partner that could hear that and say, whoa, what happened? Tell me more. What's going on? And I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't have a solution. I don't have an answer, but I'm glad you told me. Thank you for sharing that. I hope you feel better. I hope that works itself out. That would be great. That's a partner that I can count on to at least listen. And they may not have the answer, but at least they listened. They heard me. I felt heard. And having that place to express that doesn't keep it inside of me so that it doesn't go somewhere else. Because whatever we don't let out or express or heal goes somewhere else. If I'm angry at you and I don't tell you, I don't share it with you, it might come out in passive-aggressive ways later toward you. And then you might look at me going, why are you being like this? What is wrong with you? Even though I'm holding on to that anger that I had toward you 3 months ago or 3 years ago. I might still be angry about that. And then I carry it forward because I didn't let it out. I didn't talk about it. I didn't express it. I didn't vent it. I didn't talk to anybody else about it. It's still in there. So I'm doing something with it. And it's unhealthy and hurtful. And so the stopping point when you're with somebody who says, I can't handle all your venting and all this stuff that you have going on at work. I got my own stuff to deal with. I don't want to hear yours. Again, I understand it's fair to think that both people might have a lot to deal with, and it's very difficult to take on somebody else's stress and frustration. But if you're not there for each other, where does it go? That's what I'm trying to say. And maybe it needs to go to a professional. If you are both stressed and you both can't handle it, then you got to talk to somebody else about it, or maybe a best friend or whatever. But my point here is, again, I'll ask these questions. Ask yourself, can I be with someone who can't handle me talking about my day? Will I be okay if my partner cannot tolerate hearing about what I'm going through? Am I okay with never having them to vent or share struggles with? And your reminder is, I will never, ever be able to share my struggles with them. And all that reminder is about is telling yourself this is the way it will be from now on. I will never, ever be able to share my struggles with them. And if you have a counter to that, if you ever reply to that where you say, well, I can share my struggles sometimes, I'm going to ask you, you know what I'm going to ask you, how often can you do that? How often is that allowed? If you say, well, they let me do it, 10% of our relationship, then are you okay with only being able to share your struggles and vent 10% of the rest of the time you're together? But if they say, it happens every now and then, they had a bad day once every few months, so it's very infrequent, and then I'll say, okay, are you okay with it being infrequent? And you'll probably say, yeah, that's fine, because everyone has a bad day. And so I look at that as a stopping point to ask yourself, to reflect, to consider what it will be like going forward. I'll read this next one. He began to control my body under the disguise of, quote, health, pressuring me to work out, commenting on my food choices, questioning me getting chocolate in the supermarket. Stopping point. Manipulative people will control you by convincing you what they want you to do is for your own good. They will guilt you into doing what they want you to do, regardless of what you want. This is an important stopping point in a relationship. It's an important reflection point of what you're going to experience going forward. I understand that if you're in a long-term relationship and this has happened over and over and over again, it's hard to just make this a stopping point and ask yourself, well, do I want to deal with this for the rest of the relationship? Because you've already dealt with it for so long. But it's still a good time to stop. No matter how far you're into a relationship, if it's brand new, if it's 20 years ongoing, it's important to find these stopping points in the relationship so you can take a step back. Remind yourself that manipulative people will control you by convincing you what they want you to do is for your own good, and that they will guilt you into doing what they want you to do regardless of what you want. So let's say somebody has a problem with you eating chocolate. Instead of asking yourself a question, ask them, will you be okay if I choose to eat chocolate at least once a day? How about, will you be okay if I choose not to work out or work out only when I want to? Will you be okay with those things? The reason I'm saying that this is a question for them is because you want to find out where they stand and where they put their foot down, because you want to know what it's going to be like going forward, first of all. You also want them to admit what they're trying to restrict you from. Because there's a big difference between somebody saying, you should probably work out, as opposed to saying, I won't tolerate it if you don't work out. And I'm not saying either of them are right for a relationship. Like if I told my wife, hey, you should work out, but probably wouldn't go well. I would rather say, I'm going to work out. Feel free to join me if you want. But if you don't, I'm okay with that too. That might be my approach. But if she wants to work out or she doesn't want to work out, I'm okay with it because I accept her as she is. I accept her like this is going to sound terrible, like a used car as is. You get what you get. You buy it from somebody and then you bring it home. Yeah, that's a terrible analogy. Never mind, I didn't mean to say that. But you know what I mean. You accept the person as they are because that is who they are. That is who they're being, and that is who they are choosing to be. And then when you accept somebody, I don't have to tell you this, but if somebody accepts you as you are, then you won't have these kind of conversations. You won't have to say, hey, will you be okay if I eat chocolate at least once a day? Will you be okay if I choose not to work out today? Will you be okay if I work out only when I want? Someone who loves you will support the decisions that you want to make for yourself. Someone who wants to control you, they won't be okay with the decisions that you make for yourself. They will find ways to change your mind, find ways to change your behaviors. Someone who loves you will support the decisions that you want to make for yourself, which is why this is a stopping point, because manipulative people will control you. They'll try to control you by convincing you that what they want you to do is for your own good. They will guilt you into doing what they want you to do, regardless of what you want. That's why it's important to get it straight from the horse's mouth. And again, this is your choice to ask this question, but in a growing relationship, it is helpful to get this stuff out of the way. Will you be okay if I choose to eat chocolate at least once a day? How about, would you be okay if I choose to eat chocolate 50 times a day? Are you going to have a problem with it? And if they will have a problem with it, that brings it back to you to ask yourself, can I be with somebody who has a problem with me eating one of my favorite treats of all time? Because if they have a problem with me bringing this joy and happiness into my life, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but maybe not. If they have a problem with me doing that, then maybe they're not the right person for me. Or maybe they need to know that this is how it's going to be from this point on. So if they can't handle that, they may have to make different choices for themselves, or they may need to learn to accept me as I am. And so, some of this stuff is confrontational, I understand. Some of it won't be either easy or even advisable to say to certain people. If this is a violent or aggressive person, you don't want to say this kind of stuff. You just kind of want to back off and try to figure out what you're going to do next in your life, because violence and aggression is not necessary in a relationship, and you don't deserve that. But if somebody is just being a butthead, like you should work out more and don't eat so much chocolate, are you going to have a problem with me eating chocolate every day? And if they say, well, yes, then It comes back to you and you ask yourself, okay, if this person has a problem with me every day, is that something I can deal with? Or am I going to say to them, well, I'm sorry you have a problem with it, but that's just who I am and that's what I'm going to do. Now, these are very simplified exchanges between two people that may not go off without a hitch for sure. But this is, giving you a broad philosophy of what it should look like. Like if you want to eat chocolate every day and they have a problem with it, they may need to get over that. Unless you have a problem with chocolate and you want to stop eating chocolate every day, but that's your problem. That's yours to deal with. And you can ask them for help. Hey, if you see chocolate, hide it. But that's your choice. They shouldn't do that on their own unless you are a part of that decision. So remember, someone who loves you will support the decisions that you want to make for yourself, and someone who wants to control you will not be okay with the decisions that you want to make for yourself. That's an important distinction. Next section, I think this might be one of the last sections that I'm going to read. She said, there were moments of tenderness, small handwritten notes left around the house that I was the person he wanted to hug most in the world. I reciprocated, even though they were cheesy, and only later did I understand this pattern for what it was, love bombing. And she wrote, warmth without safety. That's a good way to put it. So love and gift bombing are often countermeasures, what I might call countermeasures sometimes, for bad behavior. They're attempts at balancing the scale so that it's not all abusive. Because if it was all abusive, you might be inclined to act sooner or leave or retaliate. When somebody love bombs you or gift bombs you, it's a deflection. It reminds you that things can be good if you just wait for the good times. That's a deception. This is that emotional displacement I was talking about. But instead of them replacing anger with some behavior or some other emotion, they're displacing the emotions in you. And what that means is when you're feeling low, they bring you up. But when you're feeling up, they bring you down. They bring you back to that low point. And believe it or not, there are people who do this who actually feel love and connection with the person they hurt. They feel bad, so they want to show they care. But these people have a distorted view of what love looks like, and they don't realize that their behaviors are unhealthy or abusive, so they continue the cycle. The gift bombing, the love and abuse, that's why I call this podcast Love and Abuse, is that they give love and then they abuse, and they give love and then they abuse. But that cycle, I've never seen that cycle end, ever. If somebody is showering you with love or gifts or compliments or whatever, and then they abuse you the next day or the next few days, and then they love you again, and then they abuse you again, and then they love you again, I've never, ever in my life seen that end. I've never seen it end. If you need to know if it's ever going to end, it won't. Because that is the cycle. It's the roller coaster that never stops. Once you're on that ride, it never stops. You have to get off the ride in order for it to stop. That's the only time I've seen it stop, is when somebody finally says, I can't take it. I've had enough. I've reached my breaking point. I'm done with this. You love me one day, you are abusive the next. You are loving the next day, and then we're happy together even the following day, but then it's abuse for 3 more days. And so I'm done. It's over. I'm leaving. I'm walking away. And it's that point where many realize, oh, so my behavior has consequences. Got it. Why didn't you see that before? That's the question. Why didn't you see that before? Well, they didn't see it before because the consequences weren't strong enough. They weren't an accountability that affected their life. So one of the only ways I've seen the love and abuse cycle stop is when somebody steps out of it. When somebody gets out of that cycle and says, I've had enough, or they think that to themselves, I've had enough, and they jump off the roller coaster. That sounds scary. It is. But they've had enough, and they will stop the ride, and they get off, and they're done. And when they're done, that's when the abusive person might finally say, oh, so my actions have consequences, and you really mean it when you say it hurts and you're sad and you wish I would stop. I didn't realize you meant it because you stayed on the ride the whole time. You were here next to me the whole time. You didn't leave, and I'm not blaming you for this. This is their logic. That's what they are doing. They're making this logical in their head, like, well, clearly what I'm doing isn't bad enough because they're still in the relationship. That's the logic that you have to fight against, because if your only recourse is to get out of the relationship, that's a huge step. Most people want to work things out in the relationship so that they don't have to leave the relationship. But to get to that point where you have to end things just to stop the cycle, just in hopes that it will change them, it seems like you have to go way too far just to stop something they know they should be stopping anyway. Or you believe they know they should be stopping anyway. But they don't, which is why I've never seen this end, because they don't believe they should be stopping that. And that's why it continues until somebody finally says, I'm out. And so this person who wrote, I want to thank you for sharing all this. And they go on and on about all the other stuff that's happened or has happened in the relationship. And they did end it by saying, I'm no longer in that relationship. I'm learning to trust my body, my intuition, and my resilience. I can go through this. I will go through this. And I believe that healing is happening even in silence, even when everything had to be destroyed so that I could rise stronger from it. This year for me is the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped by strength, clarity, and peace. Again, thank you to the person who wrote that. I'm so sorry you went through that. And there one question I haven't answered yet, but that's why I added those stopping points, because those stopping points are the stepping stones to burnout. If you remember, her question was, what was her question? Oh yeah. Can you explain or help me explain the correlation between burnout and emotionally abusive relationships? Everything we just talked about chips away at your very spirit, your very soul, of who you are, the what makes you you from the inside out. So the first stopping point that we talked about just slowly chipped away at your energy. The next one slowly chipped away at your energy. And what ends up happening is that your boundaries are gradually squeezed tighter and tighter and violated, so that you get to the point where you no longer have boundaries. You no longer have any energy to honor those boundaries and enforce those boundaries, to the point where you don't have enough energy to take care of yourself anymore because all your boundaries have been violated, and you feel like you have no choice but to give in to what is happening. And that's why I talk about these stopping points, because if you allow one stopping point, that's one step closer to full defeat. If you allow two, that's 2 steps closer to full defeat. If you allow 10, if you allow 100, and it all depends on your level of resilience and toleration. And resilience and toleration are often touted as very good things to have, but in the emotionally abusive relationship, they are the worst. They are the worst things for you, because the more you tolerate, the more you get violated. The more resilient you are, the more you trick yourself into thinking that things will get better, because resilience implies you can get through this no matter what. But if somebody is constantly poking at you and making you feel bad and sad and angry and upset and trying to control you, all of that will wear you down. So resilience works against you when you are dealing with emotionally abusive behavior. And so the more tolerant you are, the more resilient you are, the more you inadvertently allow abusive behavior into your life. And that's not the right word. Allow is not the right word, because you're certainly not allowing it. You don't want it. But what ends up happening is that it seeps in, because as those boundaries are violated and overrun, like water going over the top of a dam, this is pushing right over, and suddenly the dam is no good anymore. And once the dam is no good, you have no protection. And once you have no protection, you're at somebody else's whim, and you better hope that person has your best interests in mind. You better hope they don't want to control you. They want to help you climb out of the hole. They want to help you or support you in being whoever you want to be. Because somebody who loves you will honor you, honoring your boundaries. Someone who loves you wants you to have those boundaries. They want you to feel on top of the world. They want to lift you up. And somebody else who wants to control you and wants to keep you below them, they will do exactly what we're talking about today, and what we talk about in every episode, where abusive behavior picks away at your very spirit and your very soul. And the reason you get burnt out is because Your boundaries are no longer there, and you are just overrun, and you're drowning. You're drowning. There's no way out, and you feel like you're completely helpless, alone, and out of control, and somebody else has full control of your life, and you have no say on how you want to live your life because somebody else tells you how to live it. And anyone in your position would feel completely burnt out. The closest I came to feeling completely burnt out and helpless and giving up and giving in was at a job that I took that I absolutely hated. I hated being there. I hated going to work every day. And I just felt defeated. And I felt like I had no choice because at the time when I was married, my previous marriage, my wife and I were basically homeless. We were almost completely homeless. And I had to find a job. It was during the mortgage crisis and all that. We were broke and I needed work. And I finally found work and I hated what I was doing. And I also believed I had absolutely no choice. So I felt powerless. Other people, this entity, this job was going to control me. And I had no choice but to go to it every day in order to get money. And so I was burnt out like 3 weeks into the job. And this wasn't necessarily about boundaries. It was more of necessity. I felt like we needed to do this. I needed to do this in order for us to live. And so that can also lead to burnout, of course. But eventually, to use that metaphor again, I stepped off the ride. I quit that job, even though we would end up back in line at the soup kitchen. So getting away from that job meant no more money, which also meant a jump into the abyss of the unknown. What is going to happen after I jump into the abyss? I don't know. But I knew I had to get off that ride, and my wife supported me at that time. It was amazing that she did, because she knew that we would be at the soup kitchen again, but she saw how miserable I was. She was very supportive of my decisions, of my emotional state. She supported the path I wanted to take for myself, which I learned. I learned from her what love looks like. It's supporting someone else's happiness. It's supporting their path, the decisions they want to make that fulfill them. And she saw that I was miserable. And she said, I support any decision that you want to make. And I said, oh my God, really? If I quit, you're going to support that? And she said, of course. So after that phone call, because I called her from work, I quit that day. And that was a jump into the abyss. I knew that we were going to be broke again, and she knew it. And I did it anyway because I had to get out of that state of mind. I had to get out of that emotional space. I had to get under that oppression. I make it sound a lot worse than it was, but it felt like that back then. It felt very oppressive. I couldn't be myself. They wouldn't take any of my creative ideas. They just said, keep your head down and look at your screen. That's all they wanted me to do. And I had to accept it because I needed the money. But when my wife said, I'm okay if you quit, we'll figure it out, I couldn't believe it, and I did. And that's what made me realize that sometimes we do have to step into the abyss. Sometimes we do have to step into that dark cave that we have no idea where it leads, or if there's a bear in there, because the path that we're on is miserable and we feel burnt out, or we feel defeated, or we feel like no matter what we do, nothing works. So we have to take a leap of faith. And so that's how I kind of see burnout happening, is that all the walls, your personal boundary walls, collapse in on themselves. And when they're collapsed, you're, again, drowning. You're overwhelmed with the inability to make decisions for yourself, to take control of your life, or at least be able to make decisions autonomously for your life without upsetting somebody else. And you can become very dismissive, very defeated again, and very de-energized. And when you're in that disempowered state of no or low energy, it's a complete burnout. And so to the person who wrote, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I see it. That systematic chipping away of who you are from the inside out will lead to the point where there's nothing left to chip away. And if that's where you end up, then at that point, the only way off is taking that leap into the darkness. And I know that's a very vague way to explain what you should actually do, but it's usually what we don't want to consider doing. And sometimes we have to prepare for those things that we don't want to consider doing. And we definitely have to step back, take a stopping point, reflect, and figure out what our next step is and what we're going to choose to live with for the rest of our lives or for the rest of the relationship or whatever you're dealing with. I hope this helps. Share this with others who might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook contains a 200-point assessment to tell you exactly what's causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Gain clarity on your relationship today. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. Now, if you've discovered that you are doing the hurtful behaviors to someone that you care about and you want to change that about yourself, sign up for the only program that walks you through the entire process of healing from being emotionally abusive. It has changed thousands of lives and relationships and can change yours too. Visit healedbeing.com to start with some free lessons right away. And if you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all the titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You are worthy of respect, kindness, and love, and you deserve to be accepted exactly as you are. Stay strong. We'll talk again soon.